Welcome to the String Theory of the Unexplained. I'm your host, John Ventry. Our co-host is Fred Saluga, and our returning guest is Rhonda Vary. And today's episode, we're filming from my estate in Western Pennsylvania in my haunted Halloween basement. And we're going to talk about the Scole Experiment, seances, and mediums. So why don't we first, I just give you a little tour around the some of the objects down here. This here is really cool. This is a guy I met down in Virginia. He tried to start a company for crop circle beer. He actually had barley sent over from England that was found in a crop circle, and he was going to produce beer and call it a crop circle beer. This here picture I got up in Salem, Massachusetts. It came with the magazine, and I bought it up in Massachusetts, and what was so cool was this looks like my son, that looks like my daughter, and after I bought it, they were about that age, they were probably like 6 and 8, I told the kids that this hand is moving closer to the snowmobile every day, almost like night gallery. So cool picture from Salem, Massachusetts. Obviously got my collection of books. This was the first book I had written, 12/21/2012, A Prophecy. I think these things up here are really cool, little vampires. Over here you got some cool stuff I bought online and at the MUFON symposiums. These are all, this is about probably 20% of all the lectures I've ever done, but I kind of like to make a poster of some of the better lectures that I attended and spoke at and put these up. You got Superman, of course. You got your Area 51 corner. And then here you got different, this is obviously from X-Files, Area 51. This is Nosferatu. You got Roswell, King Kong, the Mummy. So some cool stuff. I've always collected this since I was a kid. Used to make my own models and stuff. Across the top, you got actually some high-end sculptures. This is supposed to be Clint Eastwood, believe it or not. A zombie version of Clint Eastwood. The Frankenstein bust, that's the actual bust of his face in 1933. Got The Exorcist. This one's made in California at a studio. It's a werewolf. That was in California. Along with the Clint Eastwood one was California also. Over here, obviously you got Hellraiser, then you got the Predator Alien models, yeah, Batman, and then you have a row of skulls. I saw that in a movie where they had I think it was Predator, where they had all the skulls from different creatures and species, so I ended up getting that. Obviously here you got Dracula, and then here's my Bigfoot corner. So this is this is my haunted basement. It stays like this all the time. But really, nothing's ever really happened down here except one incident, and that was it. Everything seems to happen upstairs in the bedrooms is where they tend to take place. So what we're going to talk about today is, right now, it is, I don't know if you have the time, but we came in, it was midnight. It was midnight when we started, so it's probably just past the witching hour here. And we're filming this at night because we want to talk about the Scole Experiment and seances. The Scole Experiment was a 5-year experiment that took place in Scole, England. It was Norfolk, England. It was 4 people that did this experiment where they wanted to contact the afterlife, almost like Houdini said when he died he would come back if it's true and contact you afterwards. It was really 2 couples that stuck with it, the Bennetts and the Foys. They stayed all 5 years, those 4 investigators. Over time, it was 15 different members, 6 mediums, different psychologists, and psychic researchers. And they actually took this on the road, and they went to different cities in Europe, and they were demonstrating, and there was activity that took place, like we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So basically, as I was thinking about this, I said, well, we're going to actually do this seance down here. And we're going to use a Ouija board and all of that. And then as I was thinking about it, I said, No, we're not doing a Ouija board, and we're not doing a seance. Not after all the things that's happened in this house, we're not doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it, do kind of a reenactment, but we're not holding hands, we're not using a Ouija board, we're not doing any of that. But we're going to tell you some of the things that basically happened. So they start doing these experiments, and what you see here is the farmhouse, the house that they were in. Actually, it looks very similar to my house. When you look at their house and my house, they would meet in the basement. They ended up calling the basement the Scole Hole, and that's where they did their seances on a table similar to this. Those are the Foys and the Bennetts. They were the people that did this for the 5 years, and they did their seances. So they had all kinds of paranormal activity happen when they started doing this. And what they did was they all wore a glowing wristband, because with mediums they can fake stuff under the table.
Right.
They wore glowing wristbands so people could see where their hands were at all time. They ended up where they would get these orbs, these balls of light, and I'm going to use a laser, but they would get these balls of light moving around, moving around, moving around. It would actually, they were larger balls of light, and they would come, and like one woman who went through her hair, and she says, I could feel it tingling in the hair as it went through, and it would move around the room. The table they were using started to vibrate. It lifted off the ground, and it spun around. And this is all well documented. There are witnesses to all of this. They started hearing voices, right? And they started using a recorder, and they were hearing voices, and the one voice said to them that they could feel the group. They were aware of this group trying to contact another dimension where they are. They could feel it, that we were trying to get to them. And there were instances where, like a lot of seances, they would just see a face, they would see a hand, but like a lot of those, it wasn't really the full body, because then you're going to a different level. But a lot of times with ghosts, you don't get the full body with that. So they ended up, they got a blueprint of a device that they were told that the device, if they hooked it up, would enable them to communicate with another dimension, okay? And there were different voices they got, so they started to record it.
I guess Bill just doesn't like thinking.
So different voices would come up. Sometimes they would hear it. Sometimes they would not even hear it, and it would be on the tape recorder. So they were told that they were coming through, and they were aware of them. They were also told that the 4 of you agreed to this experiment prior to birth. You said you would do this later in life, and they actually did it. So that's one of the things that was said. They started to have different objects that would just fall from the ceiling. It actually started to rain. I don't know if you know the story of the Rain Man over in the Poconos. There was a guy, and that's in a different presentation that I do. He was able, when he would go into rooms at a pizzeria, in a house, the rain would start pouring on them. And even with Steve Mirror, I think it was the Rochdale case in England, it would just start raining. They don't know where the rain came from. So that started happening. I was actually going to get a cup of water and say that and throw it in the air, and it would land on you. But we don't have to reenact it to that extent. So what happened was they would get all these different objects would show up. They got this writing that showed up, and this blueprints for the diagram that showed up. But then objects would just kind of drop. They'd get a piece of jewelry. They got a bullet that was pristine from World War II, would just show, just drop. Coins, different things would just fall out of the sky. We got a little feather here with a gold tip on it. And you know, this wood is actually, they told me to burn this. It's a certain type of wood, and it would ward off evil spirits. And you know, this here, I can't even read what's on it. It was actually in Latin and the diagram. So I don't really want to save any of this stuff, to be honest with you. So we're going to throw it in a little fireplace here tonight, help keep us warm. We're going to let that stuff just, we're just going to get rid of that, because I don't want it. So then what they would do is there was all kinds of light shows. They would feel breezes. There were smells and aromas, the banging and tapping sounds like I was getting upstairs. They had a pad, and just writing would show up on it. The temperature in the basement would get really cold. They'd hear bells ringing, almost like musical notes. Sometimes they'd feel very loving. Other times, the one girl, something snipped her hair, like scissors, snipped her hair, and the hair fell. There was electrostatic crackling sounds. Cameras would just go off. Some worked, some didn't work. Small items would just start to levitate, spin around. They were hearing voices. They did the medium thing, you know, with the medium. But the thing that they wanted to show was that they wanted to prove they could contact the interdimensional without a medium by doing physical stuff like I just explained to you. So they didn't really need a medium, but they had mediums there that were sensing and speaking and doing all of this. It's really a weird kind of experiment that they did. Those orbs and lights would go through bodies. Objects would drop. There was all kinds of two-way communication that was going on. They were one of the things they ended up doing was they took film, 35 millimeter film, and they noticed that on the film, when they developed it, there were pictures. So they did an experiment. They took the film, they put it in a lockbox. Obviously it was a different box than this one. They locked it up, and then they did a controlled experiment. They did their contact. They took the film out. Two of them went right to, you know, the Kodak, and they had it developed. And all different things showed up on the film. There were faces in orbs. There were pictures of people from World War II, and when they researched them, they found those actual people from World War II. That's where the writing that was on there, that was given to them, messages and how to do that blueprint was all there. Then what happened was they started to communicate with a being. They actually made contact, and they said, here it is. We got proof of afterlife, that when you die, you know, ghosts and all of that is real. The being was telling them things, but then they said, we want to see you. We want to take a picture of you. And what happened was, it said, I will appear for you if there's no light or minimal light. So basically what they did was they went and they turned the lights out, and they did their seance ritual thing, and then all of a sudden they hear noises. Did you hear that, Fred? Rhonda, did you hear that?
Yeah.
So what they did was, this thing appeared. Whoa. And it was a blue-gray alien. Well, they thought it was a spirit. At first they thought it was a spirit, but it was the gray. But it was blue-gray, the skin. It wasn't gray. So they nicknamed it Blue. And it appeared. And it would keep reappearing to them, is what happened. Very, very creepy stuff. As they continued the experiment, they realized that they were not dealing with a ghost. They were not dealing with a ghost. This thing, they started to realize, was some sort of interdimensional, malevolent type entity. And So that's basically what they were doing. It's well documented over 5 years, and that's what they were trying to prove. Now, the interesting thing is, and we've talked about this, the first time that gray was ever really appeared and sketched and everything was with Aleister Crowley in 1918, Lamb. You remember that?
Right.
So here, think about this. They're doing an experiment to contact the afterlife, and they get a gray. They get a gray.
But see, you got to look at it this way, John. It's happening quite a bit today. A lot of ghost hunters are out there. Matter of fact, there was a big thing on Facebook last night about it, that somebody actually went to take a picture of a ghost and they got a gray.
There you go.
And it's about, they start talking about beings that are dead being in a UFO. So I think that a lot of what you're saying, I think they intercombine there. I think that the ghost and the aliens are both interdimensional, and therefore they can communicate to each other.
Yeah, there's something going on, because you got to figure, Aleister Crowley did a satanic ritual and conjured up a gray.
Right.
They're doing a seance, which is, if you talk to the Catholic Church, what does the Catholic Church say about doing seances and contacting the dead?
That is something you must definitely stay away from. All you have to do is consult the scriptures, go directly to the book of Leviticus, which says, do not go to mediums or fortune tellers for advice, for this is a great abomination to God, and I will set my face against anybody who goes to the mediums and the fortune tellers. Terrible things will happen if you do those things in your life. So you must stay away from it. You'll see it all through the book, the Old Testament and the New Testament. You can go online and look up, divination, fortune tellers, according to the scriptures, and you will find out for yourself.
Did any of the apostles ever try divination, contacting a medium? Did Paul or Peter or any of them, Saul, any of them?
Well, actually, Saul. In the book of the Old Testament, 1 Samuel, the Philistine army was amassing its troops to fight against the Israelites. Saul was now the king. Samuel had died, and Saul had fallen from grace completely. He had fallen so far from grace that he was praying to God for an answer on how to deal with the armies of the Philistines, and he wasn't getting an answer. So as a result, he sought out the witch of Endor, or the witch of Galilee. And her prediction was that he would lose the battle to the Philistines and he would perish. And indeed, this did happen. He lost the battle and he committed suicide as a result. And that would be King Saul.
But here's the thing though, think about this. About 20% of everything Jesus said in the Bible had to do with the devil, had to do with pure evil, had to do with demons. The fact that they're telling you not to do this, to me, that's a clear indication it's real. They're telling you, don't do this. And it goes back as far as you can, as long as we've been human, we've done these encounters trying to get this forbidden knowledge. And I think what all that proves is that it's real. That these other dimensions and entities are there.
Right. I think too, it might be that, they actually don't want you to do it because you may find out what it's really all about.
Yeah, but you know what?
Maybe they don't want you to find out what it's about. Maybe it's written so you don't know who they are. It may be them that's actually, it's the whole thing's together.
Yeah. Well, the one thing they say, though, is when you do this type of stuff, Ouija boards, spirit boards, seances,
Consulting witches.
yeah, witchcraft, you now open that door. You've invited them in by doing this, and then they enter your house. It's an invitation.
And they come into your life and they destroy it.
And that's their goal, is to destroy you and make everything go bad in your life.
But I think though, I know a lot of people that did uses Ouija boards. I never used one. Well, we used one time.
Yeah, I never did.
But anyhow, I ain't gonna get into that. But I think the whole thing is you're inviting whatever it is in, but if you tell whatever it is to leave, it has to leave.
Only if you use the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
They have to respond to that name.
Right. So therefore, I mean, if you use it, you're picking up something, but then again, you don't know what you're picking up.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
there's
the whole
other
thing.
cultures, like even the voodoo, they believe they can control good and bad.
Right,
So
right.
obviously they don't call on Jesus Christ, they
Yeah.
can command it to leave. But when you get a high level type demon, they only respond to Jesus Christ.
Right.
But there's been other examples, Fred, in history of seances and some of the
Well-
history with seances.
Well, we had a seance when I worked in a prison down in D.C., right outside of D.C. We had an inmate that died, and I didn't know he died actually. And when we found out he was dead, he was down in a morgue in a prison. So a couple of nurses said, "Let's go down and do a seance." So we went down and we lit a couple candles, held hands, called upon him. We heard noises down in there. I mean, what they were, I have no idea. And all of a sudden, we heard something like, real quick, and then that was it.
Yeah. Didn't you have a case where you had a prisoner and he was satanic, and then you said you...
That was he killed his grandmother. He was into witchcraft, Satanism, and he told us that Satan comes to see him every night, and you could actually close his door and lock it, and you would hear like there was wind coming into his room there. And I mean, he would talk to somebody. We never opened the door.
You guys hightail it out of there and
No,
leave him
we
alone?
was there, but we didn't open the door to find out who the hell he was talking
Yeah.
to. But he said that he talked to Satan every night.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm telling you, it's real.
Yeah.
And people make a big mistake when they contact it thinking they can get some sort of knowledge. Harry Houdini was one that was very skeptical.
Mhm.
And there was the Fox sisters, and there was the Davenport brothers.
Right.
And Houdini made he actually discredited a lot of the mediums and the whole spiritualism movement. Did you just hear something back there?
No.
Oh, tell the
I
truth.
wanted to turn off my phone.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you heard something back there. But Houdini was one that was very much saying that a lot of this is fraudulent and it's not real. And he went after a lot of them to prove that that's not really what happens. But you look at American history, Lincoln, Reagan, they use psychics all the time. They use psychics in the White
Right,
House
right.
to try, because they believed it was real. Even, the whole Vril story with Maria Orsic, she was a medium. And that's where she said she was getting this knowledge that she used to really, I wouldn't say she tricked Hitler, but she definitely influenced him.
Well, they say that Hillary had a seance in the White House to get a hold of, what president was it? One of the president's wives.
No.
And she did it. And,
Okay.
Yeah, and
Well-
the lady that said it, that did it, brought it out.
It's real, but you shouldn't do it. And you know what, I was watching one of those YouTube lectures, and one of them, the guy was talking about American Indians, Native Americans. He said, the reason everything went bad for the Native Americans was because when you think about what they do with shamans, their rituals, the nature god, the water god, all of that, that's witchcraft. I never looked at it that way. He
Right.
said basically they practice witchcraft. Voodoo is witchcraft in Haiti, Africa. It's witchcraft, and that's why so many of these cultures, things went bad for them. The Mayans, so many of them, because what they practice, they were asking all of these entities to help them. And
Right.
when you ask, sometimes you talk to an angel or a relative, and sometimes it's a demon standing there that now interferes in your life.
I'll tell you another story real quick. We had a case when I was down in Daytona. I used to teach down at the college down there. And I was with the sergeant of security one day in the back there. And they had a girl that was dating a guy with voodoo. And we was up there sitting in this building talking, and we heard a noise and looked, and there was a girl standing out there. I mean, good looking honey too, And what was she doing there?
Yeah.
We walked out, and it was a dude standing there. and that was the guy that was the priest, the voodoo priest. He said, did you expect somebody else?
Wow.
Swear to God. And then he said, how do you say, he said, it'll rain 6 times on 6 days. The 666 and the 666.
Oh, I see.
And he walked away, went around a curve, and me and that sergeant went, and he was gone. I mean, I'll never forget that. That happened.
You know, one thing I've read a couple of times in the Exorcist type books from Gabriel Amorth, Malachi Martin, is that the South African Macumbe and South American Macumbe, South African voodoo is the most powerful, and the hardest exorcisms they ever did was those. And that's why I told you, remember I said that woman, I met this woman on a dating site, and she said, oh, I know you, I've seen you on TV. I want to come over, but I got to bring over Olga the Exorcist. She's from South Africa. She's a voodoo priestess, not exorcist, voodoo priestess from South Africa. And I said to myself, there ain't no way a voodoo priestess is coming into my house. No way. She would have brought in a more powerful entity to attack me, because with your help, I was able to drive these things out of my house. I mean, and that's not coincidence. That's exactly what happens. But one of them that was real was Edgar Casey. Right? Edgar Casey would go into trances. You know, he was like a medium. He would contact. And one of the things he was able to do was he was able to get medical cures for people. It was like you would come, he'd go into his trance, and he'd come back and he'd say, this is what you got. And it actually worked. A lot of times it actually worked. So one of the true ones was Edgar Casey. So, you know, that's, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to say about the mediums?
But you know, we talk about mediums, okay? We got a thing today called EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. Okay, he was talking about all the voices coming over the tape recorder. We could take that tape recorder now and say we would like to speak to someone who was passed on to the other side or whatever, and we will get a voice to come back up and talk to us. Okay, I mean, I've done that numerous times. But again, who are we actually talking to? That's the thing.
That's the risk.
Yeah, we had a guy that died down in Florida. The day after he died, we meet another guy, went on the tape recorder and asked him his nickname. And this voice actually came over and told us his nickname and his nickname. But again, are we really talking to him, or are we talking to something else? So, I mean, again, you don't know who you're talking to or whatever. So.
And that's the problem with that. Well, one of the things I wanted to do, you know, that's our little talk on seances, mediums, the Scole Experiment, is since we're in the Halloween haunted basement, and we got the right mood, and it's probably 12:30 in the morning now, you know, after midnight. Well, I wanted to continue. I picked up this little book here, Vukovic's Horror Miscellany. And it's all facts about horror movies, horror in general. So I figured what we do, I just want to talk about some of this stuff. One of the things he mentions was there was a comic book code that was put in place in 1954 where the government was trying to ban comics that were horror. Anything with horror or terror, you were no longer allowed to show that. The United Kingdom jumped on it also in 1955, and they did the exact same thing. The way it was able to make a comeback was Mad Magazine did it as a joke. So, and that's how they were able to bring horror and the horror comics back, was through Mad Magazine by making fun of it.
Why did they do that?
Well, it was the same push. This is 1954. The CIA is involved with UFOs in 53. The Collins Elite. They're trying to get people to not read books on UFOs, not read scary stuff that would turn you into a serial killer or something like that. So really interesting history there, and I didn't really knew that. You know, we're approaching 2018 in a couple of weeks, and one of the coolest stories is Frankenstein. You know, right here you have, this is a real bust of Boris Karloff made in 1933. That's him. That's his face for the movie Frankenstein. It was published in 1818. It was Mary Shelley. It was like they got together. It was rainy. It was actually really cold because this was the mini ice age that was going on. So it was cold, rainy, snowy in Europe. That's the way it was for 500 years, which is why the global warming thing is not true. coming off of that. But that's a whole different lecture. So what happened was they all got together and they said, let's all tell a scary story.
Mm.
And so each of you comes
Right.
up with a story. You come up with the vampire
Right.
story. You come up with something else. Well, I come up, Mary Shelley comes up with Frankenstein.
Right.
Unbelievable. I think she was like 18, 17 years old at the time. 17 years old. She is having an affair with Lord Percy, and it basically steals Lord Percy from his wife. His wife she was pregnant and committed suicide because Lord Percy left her for Mary Shelley. So they're together. Shelley ended up having 4 kids with Percy, all of which died as infants.
Really?
It's like they were cursed. But they got together and they wrote the Frankenstein novel. She did. And the interesting thing was, if you try to buy Frankenstein, the book, and I tried, it's the 3rd edition that's valuable. The first 2 editions was in his name because she wasn't allowed to print it.
Yeah.
Once he died, and he died, I think it was in a boating, he drowned in a boating accident, and at that point, the 3rd issue of Frankenstein is in her name and has the drawings of the Frankenstein monster in it. And that's the one that's worth $13,000. I tried to buy that, but obviously I didn't. And she dies at 53 from a brain tumor. So you kind of get to wonder if they weren't kind of cursed for all the things that they did there, you know, stealing spouses and all of that type of stuff. But one of my other favorites is, and if you're a real, well, that's Mary Shelley, but if you're a real horror fan, you've got to know Famous Monsters of Filmland. And here you see the #1 issue of Famous Monsters. You see Forrest Ackerman. I was to Forrest Ackerman's house. I was in that basement right there that you see with the Metropolis. You see Metropolis up there, the woman in gold? He had a full-size one of her in his basement. He had, from Earth versus the Flying Saucers, he had the model, you know, where the flying saucer crashed into the Congress and into the Washington Monument. He had all this stuff in his basement. It was really cool. He gave tours. So I met him, and I also met him twice at Chiller Theater in New Jersey when they did the HorrorCon, which is where I started. I started HorrorCon. I was not a UFO person. But Forrest Ackerman, he did the first sci-fi convention. Was done by Forrest Ackerman. He coined the term sci-fi. He published 191 issues, and he shut it down of Famous Monsters of Filmland in 1983. I have issue 28 to I think 110. So I wish I would have bought some of those older ones. At the time I had a paper route and I was buying these back issues of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Some more history was The Vampire. The first film was 1922 of Nosferatu in Germany. First time they talked about a vampire was in a novel in Germany in 1800. It was called Wake Not the Dead. And actually, I just went to Ireland, and they gave a tour, and they took you to where Bram Stoker worked, and at night he stayed in his office and he wrote stories, right? And they said the Dracula story of Bram Stoker, he basically stole from a different story that was about a female named Camille. Every character in the Camille story has a different named character in the Dracula story. So, you know, back then they probably said, oh, you know, he read this in wherever Camille was written, in Spain, Germany, and nobody will know that in England. So he just basically plagiarized it and he wrote Dracula. So it's kind of interesting that I think that was 80 years before he wrote Dracula. So, and what happened was when I was in Dublin was they said that Stoker started to complain of a haunting in his office. He would be there writing his stories, Dracula and all of that, and he ended up moving out of the office, leaving that job after like 15 years. They then did a dig down in the basement. Hundreds and hundreds of bones and bodies were buried under there. And we went down, they took us into the basement, and all the bones, and they showed you, it's still an open dig in the basement because they had just recently found this. And so they say he was actually being haunted when he was in his office writing the Dracula story.
What were they thinking bones were?
Oh, they were. I think it was right near like a canal. There used to be a wall, and it was a battle. There was a wall right there. This was part of a castle that turned into an office, basically. There was a wall, battles, and all the dead soldiers were basically put there and then just covered over. So it was all the bodies of the soldiers that were fighting in different battles, a particular battle, and they put them all there. So as I'm on the tour, and get this, so from the tour, he's asking all kinds of questions and stuff like that. He asked me a question, they asked a group on the tour bus about a famous movie in 1973. As soon as he said 73, I said, The Exorcist, right? And he goes, you're right. So here's my Exorcist poster. And I've met her in person. But the thing then he gives me, what he gives me is a book that, right here, well, here's our Dracula, here's Drac. And he gives me, on the tour bus in Dublin, this book of Bram Stoker's Dracula. That was my prize for getting the Exorcist question correctly. But just some trivia about The Exorcist. The Exorcist in 1973 was the first horror film nominated for Best Picture. And it was actually based on a male, not a female.
Right.
They changed it, and it was in St. Louis. It wasn't in Washington, D.C. It was in St. Louis, and the kid's name was Roland Doe in 1949. So it was based on a true story. As a matter of fact, when I went out to St. Louis for my grandson's baptism, the in-laws there said the Exorcist cemetery where, not cemetery, the asylum, the hospital that they took the kid to and they had all kinds of stuff go on, was there, and his house. And he said, do you want to go over there? And after having just gone through all of this, I said, no thanks. I don't want to go there because I think they can attach to you again. So I said, no, I don't want, I have no, yeah.
Tell you interesting something about that.
Yeah.
I lived in D.C. at that time. That's when I was a Capitol Hill cop. And that's when they brought Coors. That's when Coors first came across the Mississippi, the beer. So there was a beer distributor right over there where they was making a movie. You could actually, when the priest came down the steps,
Yeah.
he was actually sitting there drinking beer, looking out the window. We watched it.
So there you go. So, and the last thing I just want to mention in our little book of horror, since we're in the Halloween basement, is, and this is cool, he goes through so many different movies and books and stuff, a little trivia. 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween movie, right, with Jamie Lee Curtis, right? He basically, it was Deborah Hill who wrote most of the story, right? And it was originally entitled The Babysitter Murders. And then the studio changed it and retitled it as Halloween. So that was another cult classic, the Halloween. And what did they make, 6, 7, 8 of those?
No.
There was a ton of those. So that's it. That's our episode here from the Halloween basement, talking about horror movies, seances, mediums, and most importantly, the Scole Experiment, which was true and real in Norfolk, England. That's it, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.